Good morning, everybody. This is your favorite host, Mallory Shulkin, with Good Mourning, where we talk about everything from under the sun, over the sun, in between, far beyond. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Hey guys, in this episode, we hit some heavy subjects, and the main topic is grief and loss. I want to give credit to the original podcast by Anderson Cooper with guest Francis Weller. I hope you guys enjoy.
I said, it's already, and I got you. I love you. And I felt his heart stop.
Today I've listened to probably about 3 hours of voicemails from people, and every now and then I just have to stop, because it's...
I'm calling from Edmonton, Alberta, Canada.
It took more than 2 months, but I listened to every one of you. I listened to more than 46 hours of your calls.
The sobbing may last a minute or two, but I honor that.
There's strength in vulnerability.
This awful experience is actually the thing that pulled us together.
So many grieve in silence, hold it in, carry the weight. It has to go somewhere.
I didn't understand why I was so emotional. I mean, I've always been pretty good at controlling my feelings. When I was done listening to all your calls, I went down to the basement and for the first time in months, opened up a box at random. It turned out to be full of my dad's papers. He was a writer. And the first paper that I picked up was an essay he'd written that I'd never seen before. And it stunned me. Here it is. It doesn't have a year on it, but it's called The Importance of Grieving. I came across this section where he was talking about kids and the importance of kids grieving. And then he quotes a psychologist. Psychoanalytic studies have shown that when a person is unable to complete a mourning task in childhood, he either has to surrender his emotions in order that they do not suddenly overwhelm him, or else he may be haunted constantly throughout his life with a sadness for which he can never find an appropriate explanation. And when I read that, I just thought, that's me. That's exactly what I did. And it's true. I have lived through my entire life with a sadness for which I can never find an appropriate explanation.
When you repress feelings of pain, you're also repressing feelings of joy. These feelings are actually related in that they're related. I mean, we're related through many ways, but they share the same source of life as a feeling. And so when you repress your feelings of pain, which is connected to your feelings of joy, you're repressing your joy as well. And so, for so long, I was afraid of this pain and, anger and sadness I felt about my mom's death. And I don't want to miss out on joy because I'm repressing that. And now that I'm aware that I was repressing it, I'm never going to again. I'm going to try not to. Although I fall into that habit quite often. Because it is painful. When you sit with it for too long, it can be a very painful experience. So, that's a realization, not that I had. I mean, it makes sense. I might have had it, but Anderson Cooper said it very well in this grief podcast he created. And the weirdest thing that actually stood out to me in this podcast is that his dad was the one who passed away, and his dad was the one who wrote about this idea behind a child not being able to grieve. I could cry. It's like his dad knew he needed to see that and left it there for him for when he left. And he found it at the right time. And if that's not magic, I don't know what is.
And here it is, my dad writing this when I was a little kid. He knew he was at great risk of dying early. And maybe he did write this with me in mind, my brother in mind, and maybe he thought one day, maybe those kids will come across this essay. I like to think of it as like a message from him.
And I fully believe, as you should, I have come to notice and realize that our angels and our loved ones that have passed on, if you have any sort of connection with them, they will leave you signs. And although they may be buried in the earth and their, body isn't active and alive anymore, from a young age, I always said to myself, energy can neither be created nor destroyed. Energy can neither be created nor destroyed. And when my mom passed away, this hit me even more. I don't know if I've talked about it, but I have talked about it. I don't know specifically on this podcast. I had a horrible fall. It was near death. And the doctor told me that they believed I had an angel who saved my life because 2 other people fell from the same balcony and they didn't make it, which is completely horrible. And honestly, something's got to give with that situation. But I didn't really pursue it any further. I was just happy to be alive and working on strengthening my back because I fractured the first 3 vertebrae and my ankle. Come to about 5 years later, my sister, who is a nurse, was working hard to go to nursing school and work somewhere she really wanted. She wanted so badly to work at this one particular hospital. And the other day I brought her coffee and realized it's the exact hospital that I was taken to in an emergency situation when I fell. And this is the same hospital that my sister just told me an older man told her randomly the other day, I feel that you have an angel with you. So, again, the universe will communicate with you. You just need to be open to it. And as willy, frilly, tilly as this sounds, you just have to believe. And it might not even be some supernatural thing. I mean, it's possible that humans exist on multiple timelines and somehow the father was able to feel that his son might need that information. Truly, I mean, it's not even that weird to think. We deeply love our family members and deeply want to communicate with them and help them. And so it's very likely that the father was interested in this for a very good reason, and now we're here discussing it today. It's just beautiful. So it's as if the father left that for him when he was going to be ready to read it to other people like me, who is deeply moved, and to confirm with you and others that have these synchronicities that to believe.
It's reading that sentence that my dad somehow picked out. I realized, I guess for the first time, that I didn't really grieve my dad's death at all. And that I didn't really grieve my brother's death. I didn't allow myself to. That's why going through all this stuff has been so overwhelming. And I thought I was just going through my mom's boxes to organize them. But what I opened up was hidden boxes of grief that I'd stored away, that I buried when I was 10 years old, and then when I was 21. And listening to your voicemail messages, listening to 46 hours, it opened up all these boxes in my own head and in my own heart. That I need to deal with all this stuff, not just this literal stuff in the basement, but I can't just keep it all stored away anymore. So that's why I'm doing another season of this podcast. I don't want to keep this sadness, this grief buried any longer. I can't. It's like that listener, Jen, said, it has to go somewhere. It doesn't go away. And in trying to bury my own sadness, I realize now I've also buried my ability to feel joy. I don't want to live half a life any longer. I want to feel all there is. We'll be right back with my guest, Frances Weller, whose book about grief and loss was a revelation to me. Welcome back to All There Is. My guest is Frances Weller. He's a psychotherapist whose book, The Wild Edge of Sorrow, was sent to me by a listener named Cynthia, whose son John died in 2016 when he was 32. Cynthia wrote me a letter saying she hoped something in Frances's book would speak to me. I started The Wild Edge of Sorrow, and it blew me away. I underlined things on nearly every page. When I got back from Israel, I wasn't sure that I should even do this podcast. And I felt like in the face of so much suffering in Israel and in Gaza, talking about my grief or talking about any individual person suffering, I mean, does it matter in the face of the scale of suffering that we're seeing?
Well, let's ask the question, what would happen if we don't address our grief, our personal griefs? And that's kind of the collective trouble we're in right now, is that if we don't address our grief, our hearts close. And our hearts don't have the capacity then to register the suffering of the world. So this podcast gives anybody who's listening a chance to address their own grief and to not minimize it, not shut it down, not do comparison, which is so hard to not do. But our hearts depend upon our ability to keep close to the sorrows that are there.
So this actually brings up a really interesting topic, which is universal suffering versus personal suffering. At the core, these are directly related. I mean, it starts with the person. So when one person is suffering, they tend to take it out on others, which causes a spread of suffering, aka universal suffering. So for Anderson to bring this up is, I mean, so relatable to anybody who has any type of pain and grief. You almost feel like you don't deserve to speak about your personal grief because there's such pain going on in other areas. But I can't even stress the importance of Frances Weller coming in and describing that. I mean, a great point is that if you don't deal with your own personal grief, you can't even feel the pain of universal grief. So not even do you deserve it, but you do. And I'm so past the point of the shame I feel about it. And that's my biggest lesson, I think, growing into an adult, is for me to mother myself and allow that part of me to feel the pain that it wants to feel, and never let any other human being try to diminish that pain because they're uncomfortable or because they have never experienced it before. And I have actually experienced that a lot in my life, where people, it's almost like people shame and get angry at you for grief that you didn't even control, like your traumas that you were thrown into. People are like weirded out by it, and it's just, I can feel it and see right through it. And that's not everybody, but for some, there are some people that are like almost threatened by it, and it's as if I even had a choice in this 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 life that was cut out for me. And I love my life. I wouldn't have had it any other way. I honestly, the first love of my life, were my parents and my mom. And to, shame people for trying to work through that is just not a good look. And I'm hoping that we can, give a little grace for people that have experienced grief. But specifically this topic and the universal versus personal, they're both connected. I mean, I don't need to say much because they both Anderson and Weller speak so perfectly about this topic. I mean, Anderson has a completely justified question, and Weller comes in and answers it with one of the best ways he can. And so there's not much for me to say here other than there is a connection between universal and personal grief. And without one, there cannot be the other. And without healing of one, there cannot be the healing of the other. So they're mutually related.
Facing one's own sadness, facing one's own grief, it helps one become more understanding of the sorrow of others.
Yes. What grief work does is it has a way of deepening our capacity to hold sorrow, to hold suffering.
Again, another profound point by Weller. I've found, although I've always been a very sensitive little girl since I was born, life roughens you up a little bit. And, I find that even sometimes the most sensitive people, when they experience, pushback or resistance, when they show their sensitive side, or maybe they're shut down, or they experience so much pain, they bottle it all up. It's just a natural human defense mechanism to having your heart broken again. And it's almost like my grief allows me to remember how deep the capacities of feeling are in a human being. And that depth allows me to understand other people. And this is something I need to hear to myself. I need to remind myself and whoever else needs to hear it, because for so long I didn't know what to do with my grief. And I need to tell you that your grief is beautiful. And I know that whoever needs to hear this, and I know for myself, my pain has been so real that it's hard to touch. And what makes it any bit bearable is reminding myself that at the end of the day, it's beautiful. What I feel for my mom is beautiful. And people that honor that, you will meet people that don't, and you will meet people that do. I had someone in my life very temporarily. And for people that don't really have a lot of guidance, or anyone in general, when it comes to, relationships, human relationships, respect is number one. And if someone's not for you, the people closest to you will make it clear. And your ego will try to fight it for whatever reason. But I had someone in my life who not only couldn't really care less about what I went through, but used it against me. And talking about it helps me because it reminds me of people I need to keep far, far away from me. But it's a great teacher, isn't it? But trust me, just let this be your teacher. This person, this is their only way into my life, is through the horrible things they said to me. It was almost unbelievable. And I'm sure that they get off, on being a bad person. There are just people like that. But trust me, they get their karma. This person was in jail, blah, blah, blah. I opened up to the wrong person and they ended up getting, when they were angry at me about something, they told me that, so to me, my mom always told me that she would come back as a bird, or that people in her family were like birds. Everyone that's lost someone, usually not everyone, but a lot of people, it's common for people to have a little spirit animal or things like that. That was my mom's. It was a hummingbird. To make me feel pain, this person told me that a hummingbird died because of me. I remember it was Mother's Day and they got angry at me for going to the gym. These are the type of people. I don't have a name for it. I've genuinely never met anyone that could possibly talk like that. And that's what's scary, is also that when haven't processed your grief, you have to process your grief and you have to become stronger for it or because of it, or you will attract people that are toxic. And this is serious. These people can threaten your lives. My family was afraid of them. I think I was too, on a deep level, but so it can get very complex. My mom came from a more conservative family, and so growing, I think that was something I tended. It wasn't healthy though. It was kind of toxic conservatism. There is that such thing. I don't have much against conservatives. But anything to an extreme gets toxic. And this person was homophobic. The list goes on. They were abuser. It was an abusive person, physically, mentally, emotionally. And so those are the types of people. There's this weird, even my sister can relate. It's like this weird comfort that I thought existed from being around people that were more conservative, but that's not who my mom was at her soul level. My mom was actually a free spirit. She loved animals. She had a lot of, diverse friendships. And I think that if she were to be here today and let her soul grow, she would have, she was the one that really instilled in me to be kind and loving to all people from a young age. We grew up in LA, and so we saw all kinds of diverse people. Now it's normal to have diversity, thank God. But when I was younger, it was, still a topic. And my best friend growing up was of African American descent. And she didn't even really look like it. She just was. She had this amazing curly hair. She ended up committing suicide. She was my best friend. As in sister, as in the most spiritual relationship I ever had with someone growing up. And so, yeah, I've experienced a lot of grief. But I believe she's an angel. It's so hard to think about, and I don't really want to think about it because my mom also loved her. And these are two very important people in my life that I've lost now. And remembering how disrespectful some people, this person, for example, was, just reminds me you have to protect your energy from anyone who is even remotely toxic to you. It's not worth it. Do not go down that rabbit hole.
James Hillman, one of my primary teachers, said that the issues are rarely about resolution. We're not here to resolve our issues. The issue is about spaciousness. How much can I hold? How much can I allow in to touch me? Most of us, because of our traumas and our grief, that aperture has become so small that we barely register the sorrows of the world. We barely let them in.
I listened to about 1,000 calls, more than 46 hours of voicemail messages from people about their losses, about their grief. And a lot of the callers talked about their own sort of suppressed grief, the grief that they didn't allow themselves to acknowledge until late in life. And I just want to play this one call.
As I approached the age at which my mother died, and my children approached the age of me and my siblings when she passed, something was triggered inside me subconsciously that brought up the grief that I never processed as a child. I was able to finally cry and grieve as that 13-year-old girl who never could really cry it out because she had to develop skills to survive and thrive.
Okay, so this also so relevant because when my mom first passed away, I was in high school. And so, the whole year before that, I would just show up to school, put on a smile for a full year and just pretend that I wasn't terrified every other week when we would get results from the doctor that it would be bad. And this deeply affected me and my even relationships in high school. None of my friends could relate, although they tried. And it's like, you can't get mad. You can't be mad at the people, although I wanted to be. But I was mad at the world. And looking back and listening to all these podcasts, I'm going to let myself. And I never let myself because I felt so bad for even thinking that I would be mad at anybody for this. But I was pissed. I was pissed. I was sad. And I had a pretty good ways to channel that anger. I got into running and, listening to music. Those were my escapes. Like running and listening to music was my therapy. And thank God, because it kept me out of the alternative. And I've got to applaud myself. Those are very healthy coping mechanisms. And okay, so a little excerpt here. It's sounding like I had this perfect coping mechanism, which in high school I did. But a couple years passed and I was getting ready to go into college. And of course, I also had my phase of complete and utter rebellion. Not complete and utter, but as I said before, I fell 4 stories from a balcony and I survived. During this time, I was in college and my grief was expressing itself in a way where I felt like, well, first of all, I was prescribed medication for ADHD, which I don't believe in because that stuff is also toxic. It is addicting and can be used negatively. So let's get that clear. But doctors try their best, right? But I digress. We can talk about the pharmaceutical industry another time. But it is related to pain and grief. Seriously, people want escapes from that, and pills can do that temporarily, but big picture, look where it led me. I almost died. So if that's any way to steer you away from drugs, please take my advice. So I was channeling my pain, aggression, despair through partying in college a little bit. Everyone, some people party in college, some people don't. By the time I graduated, I kind of figured it out and learned my lesson and studied hard to graduate. But when I first got to college, I needed an outlet for my confusion and my despair. So there are multiple ways people end up reacting to loss. I was not perfect. And I don't want to ever state that, but I do want to applaud myself for the parts that were healthy and constructive, not destructive, which I was destructive and it showed. But thank God my mother is my angel. And yeah. Okay, we left off saying that I did have some healthy coping mechanisms, which led me to learn how to mother myself. And now that I'm 26, I'm starting to learn to, become my own mom in some ways, mother yourself. And how I would want to speak to my daughter, even though it might be hard, is or to myself even, is I'm so proud of you for holding it together so well. I mean, I drove my sister to school, like I would get groceries. I had to grow up really fast and didn't feel comfortable having an outlet where I was actually showing my true emotions, which were despair, which is anger and sadness. And now I'm finding other ways to do that, like through drums or even just singing. Singing for me has been a huge outlet, angry singing. And there's this huge stigma against anger, but anger, I'm listening to these podcasts, and anger is a natural, beautiful expression of emotion if channeled correctly. Now, anger and evil is scary and not good. And I don't want to confuse evil and anger. I believe they're very two different things, but I know for me at least they seem to have similar correlation, but they're not similar. Evil is purposefully hurting others, anger is expressing your own pain. And so to find a channel for that is huge. And I'm finally, allowing myself that space to be that angry kid I never got to be. Even when I was younger, I've said it before, I was kind of thrown into the fire at a young age, and it made me angry. But my mom actually was the one who noticed this kind of anger in me. Um, I mean, I lost a friend to suicide. There's reasons I was angry. Um, my mom knew this side of me, and now, when I lost her, I lost that best friend that knew that side of me, that I felt comfortable showing that side to me. Um, so I want to stress and normalize this idea this woman just shared in the Anderson podcast, that years have passed, but now she finally has the space to grieve. And when I was in middle school, you're taught the 4 stages. I forget how many stages there are. That's how irrelevant it is. It's not completely irrelevant, but to say that there are stages assumes that there's an end to grief. What it doesn't prepare you for is that grief stays with you your whole life. And you need to be grateful for this, or you will end up pushing it away and you will end up attracting people who disrespect you and who do not love you for what you went through. So you have to learn to love that side of you so that you can attract that type of love and depth into your own life. Back to Anderson and Weller.
I was stunned by what she said because I feel very similar.
Mm-hmm. Very few of us had our grief, our losses held adequately by anybody. So that unheld material doesn't just dissipate, doesn't just go away. It burrows in and becomes someplace that we will have to return to at some point.
You hear that all the time.
I do, and I've also encountered that myself, just how much that melancholic echo was with me all through my life. I was the youngest of 8 kids, and they're all gone. And suddenly I'm having to take care of him, get him dressed. I was now the parent of this man who couldn't really take care of himself.
Again, I can relate to this in a way that's not directly related because it was my mother and not my father. But to go from relying on my mom for everything, driving me, picking me up from school, being my emotional support, my everything. She was my everything. To watching her slowly wither away was the most painful experience known to myself. And I still went to school because I felt pressure to. Did I want to? I wish that there were breaks. I wish that our society would change so we do allow people the time to slow down. In this podcast, I believe they even speak about how slowing down, he hasn't said it yet, but he will, slowing down, warmth, and guidance during these times is so important. That is not what happened with me. I had to pretend everything was okay and try to graduate high school. And then I got mad at myself for not doing that well in school, when all I needed was love and compassion. And the story actually gets worse, if you can believe it or not. I mean, our family fell apart, from my extended family to even my own person, like my direct family. I can get into that later. The effects it has on, I mean, it's like losing the main person in a band. My mom was that. She was the glue. She was everything. And she was our foundation. And that is what I lost. And I remember one of the hardest, most painful memories I have was my mom was so sick from chemo, and she was already, I loved her so much. And to see her go through this pain, like she was already, insecure about things like her neck sagging as she got older. And I just wanted to tell her how beautiful she was all the time. She was losing her hair, and it was like watching her go into this woman that I like she was so deep and just beautiful. I mean, she was until the day she died, but you know what I mean. Alive, humorous, everything, to someone who could barely barely walk. She looked in the mirror and started crying with hair in her hand, and I watched. I remember, I mean, things weren't looking good. But I think, and I never got to fully explain how terrifying that is. But I remember one time she felt like going on a walk, and she was holding on to me to be able to walk. And I was holding her up, and she said, I'm scared and I'm sad to leave you and your father. I don't want to leave you guys. And looking back, I'm really grateful for having heard that, but it was really hard because that was our worst nightmare. My mom was the one I talked to if I was being bullied by people, or not that I was, but any issues. She was the one who reminded me to be strong and to love myself. And so I am scared of the world. I have to admit, like, the world is a scary place without her, because I'm scared of people knocking me down when I'm already, like, you're already in such a vulnerable place that you barely even can. This is some real stuff that needs to be addressed. For grief is just as bad as losing someone. I mean, it's just as dangerous as actually dying. I mean, you're struggling to get by, and then you have to also deal with other people and humans in the world who there are people who take advantage of people who are in vulnerable positions. And when you are grieving, you are vulnerable. And it's unfortunately a very sad reality I came to understand as an adult, that there are people who want to see you vulnerable so they can take advantage of you. And that's why I'm fully stepping into my power and remembering that what my mom would say.
So all of what I was feeling, the grief, the sadness, the fear, the anger, all of that had to be submerged. There was no room for it. We were in survival mode. So all of that just had to disappear. And I didn't touch that until, probably in my 40s. It began to push its way back to the foreground. And
It doesn't go away.
it doesn't go away. It shouldn't go away. It's part of our story. It's part of our history. It's part of the depths of who we are.
And let me say, thank God it doesn't go away, because they'll touch on it in this podcast a little bit. There's another podcast Anderson does with another, I think it's Stephen Colbert, but I could be wrong. He explains his grief as a tiger. And thank God I am listening to this, because I know there are people who don't want others to step into their power, but those are weak people. Those strong people in your life will remind you of your strength. Weak people will want to keep you down. Okay? Let me make that clear. For someone who has experienced this even, I believe it is my duty to remind people how strong they are, because I know what it feels like to have people try to make you feel the opposite. And so my tiger, I love. And another reason you do not want this to go away is because it's a part of who you are, first of all. And second of all, because it's a part of who you are, it will forever shape the human you turn out to be. And never forget that the universe, the highest power, the most pure and loving power, which you should be trying to connect with, wants you to step into your fullest potential and power. So remember that if you ever feel like there are people who try to bring you down, or circumstances that try to bring you down, there is always a higher power that wants the best for you. And again, no matter how much you try to push the grief away, that pain follows you until you acknowledge it and until it's expressed. So I can't stress enough how life-changing this podcast is to hear another human being discuss it. It only makes it more real for me, and hopefully for other people listening, to find some type of beauty in the pain.
And so it really does require, demand at some point, some acknowledgement. I mean, isn't that what's happening for you right now, Anderson?
Yeah, I mean, but I don't even know what that means. Like, I don't even know, like, what does that mean to it?
Well, it does mean that we have to, at some point, be willing to turn toward that grief, because the strategic posture is always moving out and away, getting busy, doing our life, doing our career. At some point, there's a pivot we have to make and turn and face all of the untended grief that's in our life. I mean, we live in what we could call a very heroic culture. And we're told to buck up, to get over it, to rise above it. Even in our spiritual traditions right now, how do you transcend this trouble? But we're never really taught how to be with it. When we're asked to carry it alone, privately, we end up carrying it around in U-Hauls dragging this weight behind us. And so we rarely feel like we're in the current of life. We're really living more tethered to the past than we are in our current life. So to really do grief work is actually to get present. It's to be in this time, in this place. But throughout our history as a species, grief has always been communal. It's never been private until now. And in that privatization, in that sense of having to sequester my grief within my own being, I feel like I'm all alone in this. And that's one of the most intolerable places for the soul to be.
This, period. They get into it a little bit more in the coming up in the next 10, 20 minutes of the podcast. So I'll maybe touch on it a little bit more there. But community in terms of grief needs to come back, or we will forever be looking to medication to suppress and internalize an already lonely place. And therefore, that's destruction. That is destruction. Our family kind of fell apart after my mom died, which says a lot about her. I mean, the fact that, I hate to say it this lightly, but man down and the whole team scatters. You must have been, she was a vital player to our team. Let's put it that way. But my mom's whole family was vital. And growing up, they were so important to my identity, but grief tore everything apart. And it's a shame because grief can really only be healed when brought to light and when spoken about. And I've described it before, but I've always felt like I was hiding something from the world every day, because now that I'm saying it out loud, thank God I'm doing this podcast, because looking back, every day in school, I had to show up after trying to get my mom to eat any type of food and keep it down. She was so skinny, turning to bones. And when I woke up in the morning, I immediately tried to get her to eat something. And then I was forced to go into school and deal with teachers who just didn't get it. And it needs to be deeper than this. There needs to be some type of grievance leave for students and families that are in work that are dealing with this. And I was actually just I've worked for jobs where I've mentioned to them that I know most jobs are very lenient about this, and it can be a tricky situation. Most jobs are really, understanding, but I did have a job where, I let them know my dad had just recently been diagnosed with cancer and was traumatic for me. And I come back and they had reduced my hours as if they thought I was lying or trying to, miss out on work, as if it's something that I wanted. And this is a real issue. And it furthers the stigma that you're isolated in your grief and that you can't talk about it. And I'm so grateful that I met this group. I'm going to a grief support group. And they've talked about in this podcast about how you just need to be a listening ear to people. You don't need to give advice. Just listen and feel their pain and share their pain and look them in the eyes. That's all people really need, is that space and love that we so rarely give ourselves. But looking back, I was hiding something every day. And it's not like I was hiding something I did. Although when the horrible thing is if you have the frequency of hiding something, people think you're a bad person. I was hiding the fact that my mom was dying. To everyone. My best friends knew, but even them, I couldn't talk about it to. And to me, it was clear they were uncomfortable and didn't want to talk about it, which it was just so painful. And now I can finally start to undo this trauma. I was hiding every day. that my mom was dying as if it was something I did or if it was something I could control. When all I really needed and wanted was someone to feel and see me and tell me that even no matter what happens, I'll be okay. And that was my mom who used to tell me that, but she was not okay. She was dying and she knew it, and it was painful. Imagine being a mother to 4 girls and having to say goodbye. But she was already a private person a little bit with her emotions that we didn't talk about it. I just would watch her cry in the quiet and in the dark. I watched tears fall from her face. Sometimes I just need to give a moment's silence because there's no words that can describe the pain I feel when I think about it. And it's easier sometimes to think of her leaving my little sister because it helps me. It's not as close to me. Like, I'm able to give it some distance and think, oh my God, like, she had to say goodbye to her baby girl. It was too painful for her that she didn't even say it.
What is the next step? I mean, I feel like an ocean of tears just below the surface. For the last 2 months, I've just felt it constantly there, and it bubbles up all the time now.
Yeah. You have to make a slow titration into that territory. I don't think we dive headfirst into it. We have to build some faith that the grief itself won't swallow me. So you can do little writing practices to begin to know that I can touch into that space and step back out. Touch into it, step back out. Begin to see that when you're there and when you return, I'm not going to drown. This grief belongs here. It'll actually help me to become more human.
The pain is so real and so deep that I just kind of avoid it every day. But the truth is it's so deep that I know that it's going to be a long time until it's fully realized. And it gets tricky too. As I said, mourning means taking time and space to do so. And in today's society where there's pressure to constantly be doing something, it's almost impossible to mourn. So they'll touch a little bit on this coming up. They speak about communities in other countries that really know how to mourn better than we do here in America.
I think I would do that over the decades by going to wars and going to places where people were suffering and touch it and then be able to step back and leave.
Yeah.
So in answer to the question, how do you begin to feel again? You say slowly. Slowly.
There's 3 principles. One is to slow down the pace, because the faster we go, it's like skiing, water skiing, Speed is great for water skiing, but it keeps you on the surface. To get into the depths, you have to slow down. So pace is the first thing. Second thing is warmth. Can I bring warmth to this place that sometimes for all of our lifetime, but also for generations, has been carried coldly? So can I bring warmth to it? Compassion, kindness, affection, curiosity.
Self-compassion you're talking about.
Self-compassion. And the third movement is to bring it into some type of communal attunement where we can share what's there.
Talking to other people about it.
Talking to other people about it. So those 3 movements of slowing down, warming the place, and bringing it into communal regulation. Those are the things that we needed as a child. Think about that, right? When we get hurt, when we're witnessing like your father's death, to slow down and just make that the only thing that mattered was someone sitting you down with you and just having their arms around you and just say, this is so sad.
I almost don't even want to finish this recording this podcast because of the deep healing that it's doing for me. I'm grateful. I'm grateful because I don't ever want to lose or push away this pain again. I need this pain to remind me of how deeply I can love too. I think it's just been way too painful. I mean, even talking about my mom and what I witnessed, it happened so fast for us. I mean, she was sick for a year and there were little glimpses of hope. You know, the doctors saying, "Oh, the stats look good." But it happened fast and I already in that moment I grew up so quickly. I was an adult by the age of 16. I mean, I was driving myself everywhere, being my own parent. I remember I went to a speech and debate tournament, and I actually got third place out of a really large group. It was far away. None of my parents could go because my mom was sick. But I came home and I showed her the trophy. And I remember how proud I felt of myself, but how sad I was in that moment that she wasn't able to be there. If I'd have just had someone say, "This is so sad," it would have helped a lot. But there's this weird thing about grief and grieving where it feels like people don't even want to help you. Maybe they don't know how. But our society is very sick. And these conversations help us realize that. And it's not something can't ignore anymore. People are sick, physically ill, dying from cancer and disease, from repressing pain. I think repression is depression. And I keep interrupting because there's just so many gems, but they dive into community a little bit more here.
You must be so sad. And then to bring the affection and the warmth to that place so that someone sees you and someone gets that how much you are lost in this moment. And that brings the communal element to it as well at the same time. So those are the things that we needed as a child. And when that doesn't manifest, what we're left with is, how do I cope? How do I survive? How do I endure this? Well, we endure it primarily by pushing it away.
So in my group, I was finally able to say in front of other people and in front of a licensed professional for grief counseling that I didn't get what I needed when my mom died. I just didn't. And my sisters felt it too. They expressed it in different ways. We weren't really allowed to talk about it because then it would, cause conversation and trigger people. It's horrible. So we weren't allowed to talk about it because other people would make them angry. Well, I'm not going to stop talking about it. And if it makes you angry, you can politely get out of here. Yeah, you can get out of here. I didn't get what I needed when my mom died. And as he said, you need someone to acknowledge your pain. And finally, I'm starting to acknowledge it myself. But you also need other human beings to acknowledge it as well. I mean, that's other people's responsibility. And if other people, you can't really ignore pain. You can try, but it's going to be inside of you. Just like with any painful experience, like scraping a knee, you need to clean it, you need to take care of it. And instead of getting my needs met, I had to cope, just as Weller says. You just, instead of actually healing it, you just cope. And that's what everyone was trying to get me to do, is just cope, just cope. But I always felt deep down that this was not the right thing to do. And I didn't trust my intuition, and look where it led me. It led me to getting prescribed medication for the pain, telling me I have ADHD when the truth is I was just grieving someone. And I ended up abusing the medication because I was in so much pain that I had a near-death experience. And so that's the consequence of not directly healing the pain and just coping and surviving. You're in survival mode. And I don't know about you guys, but I don't want to just survive. I want to live, and I want to heal, and I want to feel.
I feel like I turned deeply inward as a little child, and I've always felt like a shell of the person I was meant to be, or the person I was. And I think that's the reason I felt that. Because I don't think I've ever emerged from that defensive crouch.
Mm-mm. So even just saying that, can you turn towards that boy who made that decision? Can you just be with that for a moment and just say, that was hard. I was alone. There was nobody there for me. Not to have pity for that boy, but to begin to give some element of what it is that he needed in that moment, in that time.
I need to express the insane importance of this quote. To say out loud, I was in pain and I feel sorry for myself. And it's not pity, it's the truth. Is to acknowledge your pain and show that inner child that you acknowledge their pain. And there are going to be people that exist, and I know them very well, that want you to keep your head up high and don't cry and don't pity yourself. Let yourself cry and let yourself heal. People like that, they, first of all, they don't know real pain. I'll say that. They don't know real pain. And, I always try to be polite and don't want to push anyone the wrong way. But if someone's telling you that, they probably have not learned how to understand their own emotions, and someone told them that pitying, quote unquote, to pity yourself is weak and things like that. So let's just make that clear. These are grown men having this conversation, and these are the people that you need to listen to. And anyone else, they really need they are the ones that need the guidance. Okay. Remember that. I know it's hard, but just because people are older than you or act like they know more than you, listen to your intuition and your heart, and that will guide you to the right advice. Now, these people are older than me and are more experienced than me, and I can say that humbly. Because obviously there's a slippery slope. You can't just disregard everything anyone says. But the right people will find you, and because it will align with what you say. I mean, I've met people who try to claim that, or make you feel like feeling sorry for yourself is a bad thing. But if you don't feel sorry for yourself, how are you going to even heal your pain? You can't. You have to cry. You have to feel sad. And who is anyone to tell you not to feel sad about losing someone important to you? I mean, it's probably the worst type of person. And maybe there's underlying issues. I mean, I hate to say it, but these people are jealous of your pain. And it's a very weird dynamic, but I've witnessed it before. And again, it's like people try to make you are threatened by the experience you gain from your trauma, like the depth that you have as a human being. It's real. And being a deep person and having these feelings, it wasn't even really a choice of mine, but it's something I'm proud of. And, you know, it'll keep people that, you align with people that have the same type amount of depth as you. It's just how science works and laws of the universe. And some of my biggest mistakes were not following that intuition. Like, for example, becoming friends or starting relationships, any type of relationship, whether it be platonic or romantic, with people that just don't see eye to eye and that don't understand your pain. Don't waste your time. Please don't waste your time, because they will only try to bring you down. And you've got to listen to your heart and remember that you deserve people in your life who will either meet you where you are. And if they can't, and maybe if they haven't, experienced same things that you, at least try to understand you. I mean, that's the basic of it. I mean, at least try to have sympathy and understand you. But if they can't even do that, you're not aligned on your path.
Hey guys, this podcast is actually 2 hours long, so I figured I would split it into 2 halves. You can check in next week for the second half of this full podcast.